Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we got an important video and it's going to be a null review and like a much more different one than you're normally going to see, and a Carnage review, and I'm gonna discuss a lot of their rotations to use and how to fight them. So in this case, I'm testing my Carnage against the regular meta, and you're going to see a lot better performances, but I got an energy on Carnage, and he's one-shotting the meta much more efficiently because his original uniform used to have two skills to work together in order to get the kill, but now you could use one skill and you could still combine it with another skill to do even more damage. So there's a lot of versatility in Carnage's play now. I was fighting a lot of different teams, so I decided to fight one of my alliance members' team first because he got to null tier 4 really quickly, and this was my first fight against him, and I did really well, and Carnage basically soloed that team. It was very surprising, and it really got me thinking, like, he's probably better than Thanos at this point. So now I'm going through my other teams that I was initially using, and I wanted to get different tactics that could possibly kill the new #1 meta, which is easily null. All of the weaknesses that Sentry had that you could exploit on manual play, null does not have a lot of those weaknesses. His iframes are consistent. His iframes have very high priority. Most of his skills one-shot, even potentially with a conquest, more so with a greed, which is what many people believe is his best CTP. I would probably be inclined to agree. I think greed easily one-shots majority of the meta fast. And with null, as long as you could keep him in debuff removal, he's really difficult to kill, at least with a conquest. With a greed, he can still be killed by a lot of different energy attackers like Sentry, Silver Surfer. And one of the main ways that you're able to kill null is with debuffs and one-shot skills. So Wolverine, for example, Wolverine has a one-shot skill, but you need to debuff the opponent in order to not have Wolverine get his artifact triggered, because you want Wolverine in majority of that fight against null. But, you know, you can even take him out with Adam's second skill in the beginning if, you know, you're fighting against the greed null. Conquest nulls are much different, which is why in these fights that I showcase, that was a nice kill by Doom. In these fights that I showcase, I cover how to fight a greed null versus a conquest null. And here I'm using 5 different teams, and they're going to change. And it's against null with a support and sentry. Then I'm going to fight harder opponents like Carl, like opponents from Nemesis, an opponent from Az. These guys I've identified to be the best that I could find, and had some of the toughest builds easily. I'll take you into fights against all kinds of null teams, particularly with Agent Venom as support, because I think that Agent Venom is probably the best support for symbiotes. I take him on with Silver Surfer and Null, Carnage and Null, Null with double support. These teams are going to now dominate PvP. They're going to be probably the most picked teams in timeline battle. Probably in some weeks of Otherworld battle, you're going to see Null with many different supports. He's been able to one-shot everybody that's below him. Like, the only ones that stand against him are the top 5. And he's in the top 5 now. He's number 1. So, you know, characters like Sentry, Surfer, Wolverine, and even like Carnage still have a chance against him. And you'll see that I really get him by triggering the debuff removal lead as fast as I can, and then using a decoy to get rid of his second skill, and then continuously debuffing him while getting his health progressively down. And I've done that with Sentry, I've done it with Carnage, I've done it with Wolverine, and I've done it with a few other special characters I'm going to mention. And there's going to be many, many fights to go. So I'm going to explain more in detail, basically a Null counter video. And you could try this if you want. I'm doing this for fun. I'm going to be taking a break competitively for a while just to practice. However, you're going to see I trigger the debuff removal. He overwrites it here. And then I'll probably end up making a sacrifice. Or I'll try to debuff him. Or I'll try to kill him while he's under the debuff removal, because you can easier when he doesn't have supports. And then I'll follow up with another character that can continuously debuff and kill him. So in this case, I did it with Adam, and then I did it with Spider-Man right before he regained his debuff removal passive again. I keep saying lead because it's most times debuff removal is created from a leadership from like Sentry, but Null's passive gives debuff removal already. So that's why you're going to see a lot of double support Null teams. Here I'm using Deadpool as a dummy so I can do something like this, right? As soon as the debuff removal goes away, I could debuff trap him and one-shot him just like so. And this is against Carl's Brilliant Conquest Null in a triple meta, and I'm still taking him on with tier 3s and like 1 tier 4 meta, which is pretty outrageous, but it's difficult. It's very, very difficult, and it took me a lot of practice and a lot of tries to perfect a lot of these fights, because it's very systematic and orderly. I have to time everything correctly. I have to use my crowd correctly. I have to cancel skills right at the appropriate times. So I had to make a lot of mistakes to get the appropriate patterns, and it was a little bit frustrating to do. And you'll see that I did get some L's, and I'm going to showcase some of those L's just because I'm showcasing how difficult Null can be. And this one has a Brilliant Conquest, so, you know, you're not going to one-shot him with Silver Surfer. I have to debuff him, and I have to super guard break him and keep it there. With Null, his third skill can be canceled and it has debuffs, and his fourth skill can be canceled and it has debuffs. The issue is priority. So it's when to use the fourth skill, because sometimes the fourth skill, it doesn't have enough priority to activate right away, and it needs like a quarter of a second of delay to actually pull off the skill. And I would say it's kind of the same thing with the third skill. His fifth skill, however, it has insane priority. Like, as long as you hit it, you'll activate the skill. And then, as you can see, I kept swapping my characters at the appropriate times. Some I used as decoys, some I didn't. There, I triggered the immortality, and now I plan to keep him in debuffs with Apocalypse, or kill him with Apocalypse. I could do that too. And originally I was having Warlock with a support, but now I have him with 2 meta because, yeah, like, he's just not cutting it by himself anymore. I essentially feel like with Adam I have to fight 2 sentries, aka Sentry and Null, because with Sentry I always had to make sacrifices in order to get through. So now I have another character that I have to make sacrifices with. So now I have to make my teams a lot stronger. So I've reduced it to 5 teams, and I had it all figured out by the end of this video. But here you could see that I'm trying to debuff him and keep him there so I can eventually get a kill completely. And you're able to do it with 1 character. It's possible. So I'm going to showcase that to you as I fight these opponents. So you'll see me fight against double supports, and I actually think that the double support nulls, once you know how to beat them, are a lot easier. And, you know, I always think that 1 meta is going to be easier to fight than fighting like 2 or 3 with a support. Because the amount of supports is really up to you. If you want to have a double support null, then I would suggest you play on manual, because if you play on manual, you're least likely to trigger the debuff removal passive, because staying in debuff removal is key to winning the fight. Like, as you saw there, I actually almost killed Null completely with Ghost Rider because I triggered the passive and then I debuffed him later. So I got kind of lucky there. But Sentry could also keep him in debuffs. Jean Grey could keep him in debuffs and kill him. Ghost Rider could sometimes kill him with just a single skill and also debuff him. Apocalypse can debuff him. And I can also set myself up to kill Null with another tune while Apocalypse is debuffing him. I could use Spider-Man to kind of debuff him. I could use Wolverine. I could even use somebody like Quicksilver, who I was about to drop. Ended up dropping Dr. Doom instead. But yeah, here you can see I'm now fighting a double support Null, and you're going to see how I take him down. And yes, I got to use a lot of decoys, but because I triggered the debuff removal from Ghost Rider, now I can continuously debuff him with Sentry, like so. Now, depending on the Null you fight, some of them may have enough defense so they buy themselves enough time to trigger the passive again. So you got to make sure now that your metas are properly built with attack. So many people are now thinking that Sentry desperately needs greed now. Like, unless you really have stacked cards, Sentry needs greed to one-shot Null properly. As you can see, my Wolverine has a Mighty Conquest, and he's taking him down with one shot and with debuffs. So Wolverine is one of the top counters for Null. Carnage is a top counter. Sentry is still a counter, even though like Nulls can one-shot many different sentries at level 80 or at tier 4, depending on your build. The interesting thing about Null is that he's so CTP versatile. Like, you could rock basically anything on him. You can rock a Conquest in a triple meta, he'll do well. You could rock a Greed with a double support or a Conquest with a double support, he'll do well. You can even equip a Rage for maximum offense if you're getting him to level 80 only, and he'll still do very well. There he got stuck in Jean's debuffs, which I'll always love and appreciate that kill. I always think that those kills are the best. And you gotta know which skills have debuffs. So with Jean, 5, 4, 2, they have debuffs. So the rotation you may want to use is like 5, 3, 4, 2, 1, and then 5 again. With Carnage, after you trigger the debuff removal, you got to remember that 5 doesn't give debuffs, but 4 does. 4 can be insta-canceled. So you mostly want to do 4, 5, and then protect yourself with 3, and then do 4, 5. With Null, it's very tricky because Null's debuffs occur like a second or two after you activate the skill. So there, I try to use 4 after I buy myself time with 3 cancel 2, and then I want to use 3 again later and then 4 again later, like in 2 separate instances. Because otherwise, I'm not going to get it, and I'm going to get like one shot. Especially since my null had destruction there, but I switched it to rage because I know that enraged gives me super guard break immunity. So here you're gonna see that, and I'm gonna showcase that. And with Silver Surfer now, I'm kind of using him as a decoy a lot of the times. Same thing with Spider-Man. Spider-Man could activate the passive. Spider-Man could, ignore iframes, sometimes, one-shot the opponent if he's weak enough. But as you can see, if I don't get the rotation of Null down correctly, I get freaking one-shot. And, you have to debuff him by the second. If you don't debuff him by the second, he'll just use his second skill, or he'll get debuff removal from his lead again, which activates faster than you think. So now I'm fighting probably one of the toughest Carnage teams I could find, and I'm starting to get my teams more set now, as I know, all the characters that I personally want to utilize. I have to use them with very, very specific teams, and they all have very, very specific roles. Unfortunately, some of them have to just bite the bullet and be used as a decoy, which I don't really enjoy. But, getting a kill against one of the best players in the game is always a joy. So I'm always going to try and find a way to do it, even if I have to make sacrifices. The trick with Carnage is that you actually want to cancel his skills by running away from them, because he's going to do 2 first if Carnage is starting, and then he's going to do 5, and then he's going to do 4. 5 is actually a very easy skill to avoid. Now, the thing with Carnage is that Carnage is a complete Wolverine counter. Despite me killing him there, Carnage has a lot of physical defense. So even if you trigger the debuff removal and then you start trying to kill him with Wolverine, you're going to notice that Carnage's physical defense is really, really high. So you still need multiple rotations to kill Carnage. Carnage's counters are still energy damage dealers. Surfer, Atom, Sentry, those guys. Even Thanos could still counter Carnage, even though I think Thanos could easily be caught out by Carnage. And also, Null can definitely counter Carnage as well. Like, as you can see, I barely lived through that. Like, barely. So, and you can also see that many people are still rocking Refinement on Carnage. I think it's... Oh, that's a dope kill. That's a dope kill. I think that people are still using Egg on him, but... You know, I'm using energy on him because I still want him to one-shot as efficiently as possible. But I'm hearing good things about Greed. People like Greed CTP on him. So I would also recommend that, you know, if your cards aren't the best, Greed on a tier 4 Carnage would probably be the way to go. Now, with Atom against Carnage, it could be a little tricky because you can do something like that, but you could also fail at doing something like that very easily and then just get Atom one-shot if he doesn't have a Conquest. So you can even argue in some cases that Carnage is better than Atom because Atom needs one or the other. He needs a Brilliant Conquest with the highest cards, or he needs a Brilliant Energy or a Greed with like good defensive support like Colossus. Otherwise, he's pretty easy to kill, or he's hard to kill, but he doesn't kill appropriately. Whereas Carnage kills pretty appropriately with a defensive CTP also. So, but yeah, as you can see, like, you know, Apocalypse could take him out too with debuffs. Jean could take him out. Ghost Rider has a decent advantage with his passive, even though you gotta play him on manual. You know, Deadpool's my favorite decoy. He's always going to, you know, do what I need him to do and activate the debuff removal passive. And then, you know, Null can obviously do some damage. Ghost Rider can do some damage. Buy me some time. The problem here is that I gotta kill Null with one life of Mind Null, who's level 70 with a Rage. So I have to time it perfectly, or else I'm going to die pretty easily. And his tier 3 skill is pretty bad. But if you can trap him in debuffs, you know, you could maybe use the tier 3 as, you know, a protective kind of, you know, iframe. But his main purpose is to utilize his main skills. His second skill, his fourth, and his fifth, mostly. Here I'm showcasing another really strong team, WNG Terry. And I'm showcasing some tips and tricks against Sentry. So you can use the second skill to sometimes interrupt what Sentry is doing. You could use the second skill and force cancel it to run away from Sentry's skill, like his second skill. And then as you saw, I killed Null with Quicksilver's debuffs, which was amazing. And it made me stick with this team because this team had potential. I also took them into Otherworld battle. I think Null and Carnage really dominated Otherworld battle. With some cases, I paired Null with no supports. With some cases, I paired him with a couple of supports. Sometimes I paired him with Carnage, sometimes I didn't. But Null, his placement in Otherworld battle is very versatile. You could start with him kind of in a corner so he can creep into the fight. You could put him in the middle so he effectively one-shots in a wide range. That's one of Null's great abilities, is that his skills have a large area of effect and they target you so you can't avoid them even in a manual game like Timeline Battle. Or you can put him last where he could maybe sweep the rest of the board, and he's always going to be difficult to kill no matter what, especially since a lot of the metas are debuffed usually. So, you know, Wolverine, Atom, Surfer, Sentry, all of his counters are debuffed, which means he's probably going to sweep if he's not debuffed himself, which he probably will be to a very high degree. But as you can see, he does well in the fight, in the middle of the fight. He kills a lot of the opposition, even if the opposition have supports and I don't. And I'm pairing him with Meta too, but as you can see, he's taking on an Atom, he's taking on an Agent Venom. He was debuffing a Wolverine earlier. He could easily take on a Surfer, easily take on a Thanos. Now, the teams that you're going to want to avoid, especially if your null is not full, is obviously tier 4 nulls. Because tier 4 nulls are probably going to sweep most of your team, and your null is not going to be able to kill that null effectively. I think I just got lucky in that case, but it's probably because of my rage and my effective damage. But I got close, but I didn't get the win there. I think the reason why I got so close is because you really want to have Otherworld battle teams with debuff removal. If you don't, it leaves a massive gap. And while Null doesn't need debuff removal passives from anyone else because he has it himself, you're affecting your other teammates by not having somebody like Strife or somebody like Sue there to complement and give him debuff removal. But yeah, as you can see, he did well in a lot of these fights. Now I'm going to use just Carnage alone, and you could pair him first if you want him to sweep some of the board, or you could pair him last to do the same thing. He's pretty effective. He just killed a Spider-Man and the remains of a Ghost Rider by himself. He was killing a Thanos pretty effectively. Carnage is definitely meta, and he's definitely a recommended uniform to get. I think he's could be in contention to be as good as Wolverine. I've yet to see too many tests on Conquest for him, but I heard that it could be very good. Now, in this fight, I'm pairing him with Null, who is debuffed for this week, but Null can obviously still tank damage, and he could probably still get some solid kills on top of that. Paired with Carnage and like other meta like Ghost Rider, the team becomes pretty formidable. And I easily got into Challenger without playing too many fights for this season. So, yeah, as you can see there, Null is still getting like very solid kills. Carnage and Null just swept the board completely. I paired them with Agent Venom to get the maximum amount of defense, even though I don't have Agent Venom's new uniform. As long as Carnage and Null are under debuff removal, they're still going to be quite defensive, even with an offensive CTP. At that particular moment, I equipped them last instead of first, and they still were effective. So now I'm pairing them first in the match again. And as you can see, I drift Null more to the side so he can creep into the fight and then potentially get a sneak attack. So this showcases Null and Carnage in Otherworld battle, and then now I'm going to take him back into timeline battle. I have 5 set teams, and I'm going to use against the top Surfer, Null, Agent Venom team that I personally could find. Now, I honestly believe that Silver Surfer should still be a lead, and the reason why is because, yes, like, Null may lose a little bit of attack, but you would rather Null lose a little bit of attack. He's still not going to change his spot in the top 1 meta, and Silver Surfer can still have that layer of debuff removal that he desperately needs, and he'll still desperately need it even with a support with him, because when Silver Surfer becomes susceptible to debuffs, so he has a skill that gives him 5 seconds of debuff removal with his debuff removal lead. If you remove his debuff removal lead, he'll easily be prone to debuffs, and when you're prone to debuffs, sometimes your support buffs from your support characters don't work as efficiently as you would think. So yeah, like as an example right there, I easily took him down with Sentry, and I could still debuff him with Invisible Woman and Spider-Man as well. And Spider-Man has a much easier time killing him. But of course, does Null benefit from being his own lead? Yeah, but I would only recommend using Null lead if you have a double support for Null, not if you have Null paired with a meta and support. If you have Null paired with meta and support, you should still equip debuff removal for the whole team so the whole team performs better. Now, that's for autoplay purposes. If you're playing on manual, it's a different story. But you just gotta make sure that Silver Surfer doesn't get caught. But that was already 2 teams. Now we're moving on to the third one. And obviously, Warlock is going to have a massive problem with this Silver Surfer, regardless if he's got debuff removal lead or not. Because I had him with a support initially for attack, and without that attack support, the Warlock needs like 3 skills to be cancelled with the 5th skill ending in order to actually get that kill on Silver Surfer properly. And then I have to make a sacrifice on him as well. But Jean gets that kill pretty consistently if you could time the overriding of that debuff removal and catch him in debuffs and make sure your rotation is right. It works like a charm. It's one of my favorite kills that I like to get, especially since these teams are so hard. Like, people don't necessarily understand when is the right opening to actually get Null, like to actually get these characters. I understand the opening, so that way when I practice, I can consistently get wins over time as I practice. As you can see, I did the same tactic with Wolverine as I did it in the previous fights with triple meta or with double support. It works the exact same way. You just have to activate the debuff removal and then lock him under debuffs. And the good thing about it is that you could lock Null in debuffs for like 8 to 10 seconds depending on how well you timed your attacks. So it adds a bit of challenge, it adds a bit of strategy, even though we all know, like, Netmarble's games, they love to create massive imbalance, so it's almost like players are forced to pick the best option. every time they come out with something new. By the way, guys, the indication of where you could find debuff removal is the yellow indicator where the icon looks like a feather. So if you want to find that stat, it's there. But anyway, this was my last team. I showcased Null with a Rage against a top tier 4. I showcased his rotation to use to make sure he keeps the opponent under debuffs. I showcased as many counters to top Null teams as I possibly could find. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.